All right, I think I'll get us started here. Uh, very quickly, I just want to present our speaker and then we'll get to it. We'll start talking about the interesting fruit we have on the screen here. So, over the past 50 years, Laurentian University has been host to a myriad of different professors who have put their best foot forward most of the time in researching how to regreen the Sudbury landscape. So the Environmental Sustainability Committee is proud to announce a new series of seminars based on exemplary research related to the Sudbury story. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Joseph Shorthouse, an entomologist who found a keen interest for one of Sudbury's smartest plants, the Lowbush blueberry.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Ben. Pleasure to be back on campus. Hard to believe that it was 1975 that I arrived here for a 2-year period, 2-year appointment, and then we're out of here, which is what my wife and family wanted, not to stay in Sudbury. It was kind of a bleak place back then, but having a plant such as this nearby and an opportunity to change one of the most damaged ecosystems on the planet was just too much of an attraction. And of course, we've been here all these years later. What I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about the Sudbury story, the Lowbush blueberry, the succession and role this plant plays right on the acidified rocks. Digress a little bit to talk about tailings, and then a topic that is probably unfamiliar to many of you is rating plants as intelligent organisms, and then Lowbush blueberry as a campus food. When I watched the seminar being set up, and I think back to the first lecture I gave, and one of the people in that lecture is here right now in September of 1975, Franco Mariotti. You all know from his work at Science North, but everything was done with typewriters. All your library work was reprint request cards, interlibrary loans. All your literature was through the library. All your correspondence was through the post office. Kodak slides were in carousels, not memory sticks and all this stuff. However, typewriters didn't break down last week when the campus was attacked. All of your drawings, every graph you made was Letraset. There were no computers, no internet, no cell phones. Secretaries with typewriters did everything.
Yeah.
You can't, young people in here, can't imagine today, instant communication. I was involved with a group with an author in Bulgaria, in Washington State, and in California. And a manuscript was worked on, push of a button, send it from Bulgaria. I had it a second later. Work on it, boom, send it back. Each of those would have taken 1 month using the mail, 2 weeks to get over, 2 weeks to get back. Then it was submitted last Sunday night. Bang, submitted. Bang, on my computer, the journal had it and had a number for it and how to work on it from that point on. Instant communication, a lot more cooperative projects, which you can do around the world now due to electronics. A tremendous increase in productivity of every student in science, every scientist today, because of all of this technology. One of the negative sides that I've seen in my career is far less social interaction, as has been brought on by all of the electronics. So what I want to do today is to tell you a little bit about my sitting on a hill beside the campus for 48 years, at least once a week, growing up and looking at Lowbush blueberry above the area we lived in, right beside the university on Bethel Lake, and observing Lowbush blueberry. And what I'd like to do today, even as an entomologist, although there were some very interesting insects on them, tell you a little bit about what I learned from that period of 48 years And we were there last summer. So this is halfway up the hill. You can see Bethel Lake University's to the left. You can see the smokestack in the background, which is not even used anymore. When we moved there, we would get fumigated. We moved to this house down below here, along those houses at the lake. You get fumigated a couple summers. And of course, no such thing exists anymore. This is a helicopter picture I took at one project where the province provided a helicopter to look at the damage of the forest ant caterpillar, which is those trees to the left. But it shows you the top of the hill that I sat on. And the interesting thing was to go to the very top of the hill, typical of the hills around Sudbury, where the rock has been washed with sulfuric acid and burned black. The rock is not black naturally, but what an inhospitable site for plants. And what I'm going to show you today is that I, in sitting there over those many, many years, watched plants creep up onto that rock. This is not an area that received remediation, but these are natural events as I understand them. And of course, all of the events around Sudbury started with the Big Bang. Many millions, if not billions of years ago, a huge meteorite hit the planet. And this area, at a time we understand from geologists, was underwater. And this giant meteorite hit the planet, bounced up, and the process brought much of the molten material at the base up around the edges, which ended up with this huge scar on the surface of the planet. And the areas where the materials from deeper in the planet were brought to the surface, and the red dots are where there are mines or have been mines, because that material brought to the surface, closer to the surface, was rich in copper and nickel, as you all know. And then a whole series of smelters and roast beds were developed in this area to extract the copper and nickel from the ore. And of course, that did tremendous damage. Here is one of the pictures I took in October of 1975. Remember, we're here for 2 years after my wife had said, when you go for the interview, make sure you blow it. I've heard about Sudbury, we're not going. We did come, and this was on a field trip. Gerard, I don't know if you can remember any of this, but it was decided that about 6 people who thought there was something very intriguing about these habitats would have a conference where we could share each other's knowledge and interests. And so I think there was 6 people who showed up at the conference, 4 of them from Laurentian, I think 1 from each of the mining companies. And we went out to go on a biological field trip. And this is one of the pictures I took. And I remember well coming home and telling my wife, I've seen the most wonderful thing in my whole life. I've been walking on the surface of Mars. And you could almost hear her saying, oh God, we're going to be here longer than 2 years. But this is the way the area was closest to the smelters. As you made your way away from them, plants came back or were there on their own and able to survive that decreasing amount of pollutant as you make your way away from it. And of course, it was people at Laurentian University listening to the citizens of Sudbury saying, we don't want to have a city that's known as the most polluted city in the world. We have to come up with a way to get things growing on these damaged sites. And so here's one of the pioneers, Keith Winterhalter, who came up with, after experiments with fertilizer and limestone and particular kinds of plants that would grow on these inhospitable sites. And to my shock, one of the first years that they put a type of grass down on these sites, well, anybody watering it or looking after it, it started growing. And these grasses in the most inhospitable sites, actually, to everyone's shock, were growing. You've all seen these, I'm sure, in an area in Sudbury. Let's go back again. That is 1981. And after the work of the restoration committee, you have this, and this was 2000, 23 years ago. It looked like this. I mean, I'm anxious to go up and try, but you can't really get a picture of the same thing. Try and shoot it again because the damn forest is in the way and you can't see what the area looked like. Here's a picture, Gerard, I was just telling you about. You know where Coniston is, and you know the road coming out of Coniston past the schools onto Highway 17. I made the mistake in the fall of 75 with my young family saying, this can't be that bad. Let's go for a picnic. There's a really interesting sounding place called Copper Cliff. We'll go and sit on a hill there. Bad move. The following week, it can't be any worse than that. Just calm down. Everything's going to be fine staying here. We'll go out to Wanapate and have a picnic on the hill there. Bad move. Here's the site at Coniston. And this is about between 70 and 75, right, Gerard? Something like that. Yeah, I have no recollection, but they actually had terraced the whole area. Marilyn and I went out last weekend to shoot the exact same site. Isn't that amazing? And it's like that all the way through Wanapate. Very, very exciting. So that's little plant, Lowbush blueberry. Let's talk about it. The one that you've all come to enjoy. Enjoy the berries. I've had 2 MSc students and 1 PhD join me with studies of this plant. Now remember, or accept that when I say Lowbush blueberry, I'm talking about the shrub. You might be thinking of the berry. When I say blueberry, you might be thinking of the berry. I'm talking about the plant, okay? It's the same with my studies on roses. I now call them wild shrub roses, because if I say roses, somebody thinks it's one that you bring and give to your girlfriend. That's not what I'm talking about as a biologist. So we're talking about the plant. And no matter what plant you study or what animal you study on this campus or anywhere near here, as a biologist, you're missing out a lot if you don't stop and think, how did it get there? We all know that 12,000 years ago, there was 2 kilometers of ice over us here. And in that short period of time between then and now, everything had moved back in here. So when you're sitting like I am on that hill, be thinking about, how did this happen? When did they move in? You may have seen these figures before. A guesstimate of what the ice sheet in the eastern part of North America covered everything down to about Ohio. And everything was wiped out. And then the melting waters, as you probably know, made the 5 Great Lakes. And of course, a little red dot is Sudbury, 14,000, 9,000, 7,000, 4,000 years ago. And 4,000 years ago, ice was still up near Moosonee. And that means that the early human beings, early indigenous people that arrived here, saw those ice sheets and were hunting mammoths, camels, and mastodons around this area. And probably wild horses, which evolved in North America. All things that are fascinating when you try to imagine how Lowbush blueberry, for example, today exists over this whole area. How did this little shrub get here? We also recognize that when human beings were here about 10,000 years ago, after having, the main theory is walked through the split between the 2 ice sheets from Asia through Alaska, Yukon, and then the corridor down into North America. We're here before the Egyptians started even building pyramids. And I would like to think that the blueberries were already here. They're one of the first plants to move in as the glaciers receded back. And this is, hopefully you all appreciate the artwork, the woodland art started by artists on Manitoulin Island. And Norval Morrisseau, one of his famous paintings of a lady collecting blueberries with her child. So 2 years in the life of this plant. You have to admit that there's a lot of beauty in this type of habitat. So we'll start in the fall. The leaves turn beautiful red. They are already preparing for spring. They've produced their leaf buds already. And then soon after November, you've got a blanket of snow. Remember what that white stuff used to be? Remember hearing about it years ago? Looking out the door now, you wouldn't know it. But as a biologist, you would also recognize there's a lot going on under that snow. And there are about 8 species of lichens that grow and are active under the snow, and their roots are interconnected with all the dandelions and the dandelions. That's one of the other things that work with blueberries, and the two of them are existing together. The different fungi and lichens that are underneath the snow. And as that snow starts melting, the blueberries are the first plants to be exposed. And even under the snow, their buds are ready to go. All it needs is a bit of heat, and the leaf buds to the left and the flower buds to the right are ready to go. And as you're sitting on that hill, you would see all of these things happening. Sometimes it's very uncomfortable sitting on the hill, especially after a freezing rain, but fascinating. It makes it kind of an interesting picture, but to be there when freezing rain is sticking to all of the stems of the blueberry, and they're well able to tolerate that. Those kinds of conditions are not harmful to them at all. And then, as you know, near the end of May, beginning of June, they produce vast numbers of flowers. Fascinating little flowers, blueberry flowers are. They're little tubes that hang upside down. And when we get to talking about intelligence, remember, these are sessile plants that can't move. So if you want to reproduce, you got to get somebody to reproduce for you. Okay, so we have to evolve techniques to have somebody come and move the male part to the female part, because you can't do that yourself. Okay, and of course they have evolved insects to do that. And the pollen in this upside down tube isn't released until an insect comes down and shakes the hell out of that flower. And this is called buzz pollination. And not many insects can do that. But the one, if you sit there long enough, over 48 years, how do you go after one that comes in? Bzz, gone. Bzz, gone. By the time you get your camera out of the camera case, it's long gone. So you don't get a shot like this going up and doing so on the very first day. This was a very lucky one. And then even luckier was a close-up one where you could actually see the pollen of the flower on the leg of the bumblebee, and they're big enough and strong enough. Honeybees can do the same thing, but few other insects can hang upside down and then move the muscles in their thorax such that it vibrates the whole flower and the pollen comes out of the tube onto the back of the insect. Sitting up there all year round, this is the 8th of May in the year 2000. It snowed right when all the flowers were in bloom. And when I looked out and saw the hill, I thought, oh man, I don't want to go up there. These plants are not a good one for a guy my height to shoot parallel with the ground. I'm gonna have to lay in this very wet snow to photograph these things to illustrate that did not bother them at all. The snow actually was an insulating layer for them, and it looked very sad, but that afternoon the snow was gone, and then the flowers started to form, the fruit started to form. The flowering continued, the fruit formed. The fruit initially starts upside down, and it actually has chemicals in it that prevent herbivores from eating it. It's got chemicals that make it very unattractive to eat. And when you're not full grown, you don't want anything eating you. And then within a week of them hanging upside down, they turn around and point upwards, because you know all the blueberries you've eaten are pointing upwards. And here's the seeds growing inside. And the seeds are kinds that you know, when you think of eating blueberries, you you don't crunch any seed inside. They're pretty small, but they do the trick. And then the flowers or the fruit at about this stage start becoming attractive to herbivores who would eat them. This is a little early yet. So the anti-herbivore chemical is slowly dissipating, and the one that says, I'm attractive, eat me, are starting to appear. And then by the end of June, the berries are full grown and ready for another animal to help in not their reproduction, but their dispersal. And these are the ones that brought it from Ohio up to Sudbury. There's a mature fruit with little tiny seeds inside. While sitting there, and as an entomologist, you all will probably remember this animal. It's an endemic natural insect that feeds on particularly aspen and birch. And this is the eastern tent caterpillar. But every 12 years, their numbers explode. And they defoliate any, and if not all, of the birch and poplar in Ontario, where they're found. They become so abundant, there's cases of cars having accidents by their tires causing a greasy mass on the roads. Extremely abundant and wonderful to be sitting up there while this all happens as an entomologist and watch them eating all of the birch and poplar leaves and thinking, well, you rarely see anything feeding on the leaves of Lowbush blueberry. They're all perfectly safe. That's not going to happen. And then, of course, as you well know, if you've had a tree like this in your yard, they leave the tree after they've eaten all the leaves. They leave the tree and go looking for other sources of food. And on the hill of the university, that included Lowbush blueberry. And it's like, God, I don't want to eat this, but if I don't, I'm going to die. And they ate all of the leaves of blueberries in the whole Sudbury area. In the last outbreak, maybe about a outbreak. Gee, this is a former student of mine. This is 1988-ish. However, here's an animal that's well used to having all the tissues above the ground consumed. Doesn't bother them in the long term at all. But what was very handy for them, again, the complexities of nature, all those leaves of blueberry were turned into nitrogenous pellets. All the fecal matter of the caterpillars covered the ground. So after a rainfall, that massive amount of nitrogen was a tremendous jolt and boost to the blueberries, and they were even more luxuriant the following year. Kind of neat, right? There are a whole variety of birds that eat these fruit that are playing a key role in moving them from the glacial refugia in north central United States all over this area and all the way up to northern Ontario. And if you look around your sidewalk, you'll see the fecal mass of birds that have been eating Lowbush blueberry. And in there, that's about as close as I wanted to get, but in there would have been all kinds of seeds that were not damaged at all, and in fact are in a little pile of fertilizer when it's time for them to mature. And what will be very exciting, especially for the international students that come to our campus to look at Lowbush blueberry in the summer, is to share the habitat with some of the other animals that also move from Ohio up to Sudbury. And it's interesting, you pay no attention to them, they'll pay no attention to you. And as much as people are afraid of these, and the time you've been here, I haven't heard of one person attacked by a bear or eaten by a bear. We had 10 on our street the year my wife turned 40. Oh my gosh, that was a long time. I mean, 10 on our street in 1 year, one even in our garage, eating the seed potatoes. Fabulous animals. So as a biologist, you go wandering around following them because you want a picture of their scat. So you have to wait until they have a bowel movement, then run in, hopefully let the bear get far enough away, and there's the scat filled with seeds. Another example of the complexities in this part of the world. Succession on the blackened acid-washed rock. So here's the top of the hill. No work by the VTAC committee on this at all. Very stark, acid-washed, very, very hot in the summer, cold in the winter, very, very dry. Terrible place for plants to start growing. You'd have to be a very special plant to be able to grow there. But sitting watching it, there is a lichen coming in. And of course, the ones that come in are telling us these are acid-loving plants, as the Lowbush blueberry is, as you've probably gathered. So here's a lichen growing on that solid rock, getting everything it needs to survive. And then as you'd sit and watch it, mosses started growing among those lichens. And you'd see this gradation from black at the top of the hill, down the side, or from the side, you'd see these moving up the hill itself. And to my amazement, there were little seedlings of Lowbush blueberry growing in that mass of birch and lichens. And how could a plant live in a site like that? This is one of my favorite pictures. Such a tiny plant, barely able to survive, I would have thought, and it's reproduced, and it's making berries. Here's a little older one in one of those patches. And right in the moss itself, one that is producing as many berries as it would in any other site. It's designed to do such a thing in an ecosystem. Now, it will very quickly dry out unless there's leaf litter. And one of the hypotheses I had is that lichens brought mosses, which brought blueberries, which brought leaf litter because of the massive branches they have. And the leaf litter produced or allowed more moisture. It allowed it to be cooler, started the formation of soil, and then that allowed the birch trees to come in. So all of these things I saw, and if I forget in a few minutes, this is part of what's referred to as intelligence in plants that are physically changing their habitat for their benefit. How many plants can you think of that on its own turns an inhospitable habitat into a habitat for it to live in? I'll probably mention that again. And as Gerard Corton well knows, he's the one who taught me all about this, that if you have no leaf litter and you have soil on the surface of the rock, in the early spring under certain conditions, it'll ice heave, and ice crystals will move up that high. And any plant that's growing there, as he well showed, is decapitated. So you need leaf litter in a forest. And there's a classic example of frost heaving. And if all goes well, there's your birch trees. Another plant on the campus of Laurentian University that one could have half a dozen MSc and PhD projects on, just looking at how this plant is able to survive in this once was inhospitable habitat. This plant also grows well by cloning. It reproduces by seeds, sexual reproduction. It does not need that to grow. It can produce small plants by sending out rhizomes that very quickly can fill a room this size. One plant, one mother plant, original plant, and then sending rhizomes out, sending them looking for water, looking for nutrients. And you'll see that right on campus. I said this is in a 2-year cycle. Remember, blueberries have adventitious shoots in year 1 after the seeds form, or along one of those rhizomes, an adventitious shoot comes up. It just produces leaves to send food down to the rhizomes and the roots. No flowers, no fruit in year one. That's always year two. That's why in commercial blueberries, they burn it every 2 years. Burning increases the amount of berries. Damage increases the productivity of berries. It sounds like that should not make any sense. I think it would be neat to get somebody to do an archaeological type study by taking the soil away from one of these big patches and see how many connections there are. But we now know they're also communicating with each other. They're sending chemical messages. I'll get onto that more in a moment. So what I would suggest is that what you're looking at here is one plant. And these are all the little plantlets that have been produced by the one that formed the seeds. And this whole mat is one plant. And there's been studies in the commercial fields of Nova Scotia that a couple hectares in size is one plant. It'd be neat to prove that on campus. The best I can do for you is to photograph an area on my hill where I'm assuming the ones that are starting to get prepared for winter on the right that are a little different color is a different plant than the one on the left. So these blackened hills and this mat of lichens, mosses, pushing its way down over the hill. I went up once and lifted it up to have a peek underneath. If it was a hot August day, you want to put your hands down on that rock. It was so hot. But I never measured the temperature underneath there, but what a wonderful project that'd be for somebody on our campus. And then the top of our hill looks like that now. Isn't that amazing? How well is this animal adapted to Northern Ontario? Thrive in a thin layer of soil, make its own soil. They love acidic conditions. Sadly, with the superstack shut down, it's quite possible that we'll start losing our Lowbush blueberry in the Sudbury area. Tolerate temperatures to minus 45. Gain from forest fires. Tolerate drought. Gain from defoliation by caterpillars. Trick an animal to pollinate them, trick an animal to disperse them. These are all pretty unique characteristics. The tailings, I digress for a bit. Mining is an important part of this institution, as you all know, but it has all kinds of opportunities for biologists as well. You don't see the tailings. You see, and you don't even see the slag heap anymore. That was our main source of entertainment in the fall. Any visitors came, we would go by dynamic earth and watch them drop this molten metal out of train cars, and you know, I think that was an opening scene in Men with Brooms in that Hollywood type movie. But this yellow area is all of the tailings. It's the land owned by was Inco and now Valet, and that shows you the size of the tailings compared to the size of Sudbury, Coppercliff, and Lively that are in gray. And remember, when the rock comes up underground, not all of it is copper and nickel. In fact, about 95, 96% is unusable rock in the current processes. The ground up rock, I understand, is about the size of sugar, maybe closer to flour. After it's been, the valuable ores are removed, put in these big pipes under high pressure and sent out to lakes that the company owns that is going to use them as depository for all of this rock. And we got involved in that and had the grad students and myself a research project up there. And John Gunn will remember Marty Puro, where we had to talk him into agreeing that biological studies here were worthwhile. And he gave us a lot of money to undertake projects here. But here's one of the lakes being filled in. And here's the process where this is going to be filled in halfway up the side of those trees. And the problem is that it's also turning a little bit red. And here's one of their lakes that is filled in with the fairly fresh tailings. And the problem is that when exposed to the air, it releases sulfuric acid and it acidifies. And the problem is that all of the waters from the Sudbury area come out at Spanish, and as I like to joke, in Manitoulin, it all goes under the swing bridge. And you've got to make sure this water doesn't go under the swing bridge on Manitoulin. And the company does a very good job of keeping it in their area. So what they had wanted to do was to develop an ecosystem on the surface of this. And another big challenge in the Sudbury area, and they had a agriculturalist by the name of Tom Peters, who played a key role in how to do this. It hired and brought in a lot of students. Here's our son at one of the areas where the water is leaking out at the base of a berm, all to be collected and reused to move more tailings to the property. We were told by INCO workers that there was a beaver in here, and the beaver was orange. I never did see it, but I wouldn't be surprised. And this fellow, our son, did a study on the movement of spiders back onto these sites because Tom Peters learned how to grow grasses on the surface of this most inhospitable site, with the objective being that if you grow an ecosystem on top, waters will not move through and will not leave the property. And I haven't been up there for about 20 years, but an old graduate of our university is in charge of all of this. He said, anytime you want to go, come on back up. Well, you know what I'm going to be looking for when we go back up there? And I saw it in the late 80s, Lowbush blueberry. Can you believe it? On the edge of these tailings, this little simple plant was growing on sulfuric acid laden rock with next to no nutrients in it. Well, if that doesn't turn you all into botanists and wanting to study plants here, I don't know what does. But something in the last year, as I have worked on overview articles, when you become an old retired professor, you look back and say, what word can I leave? What contributions did I make? Can I make some sense out of it all? And I work on roses across Canada, and everything I've learned on roses since 1968, putting into an article. And because of this new technique that exists today, are you using this company out of Russia, where you type in your title or an author, boom, there's your article. Copy it, any article, any language in the world. So that's what I sit and do, as you do. We all used to go to the library and meet with people, and interact with people, or meet students in the classrooms in the evening to talk about literature. But now you do it sitting in your pajamas and get far more and far faster than you ever could in the past. So I'm looking at roses and arguing they're the most intelligent shrub in the world. And I, of course, say, well, wait a minute, we don't have many roses on campus, but what about blueberries? And then the way to look at this is to compare an animal with our Lowbush blueberry. A typical animal, a mouse, if you like. If you're sitting on the hill and a mouse runs over your foot, it's mobile. It runs around to find food to mate. It has a brain, it has a nervous system. It has vital functions concentrated in one area, and organs in one area. It eats plants, or animals that eat plants react to very few stimuli, only about 7 or 8 stimuli. Plants beat that 3 times down. Very short lifespan. So you look at your blueberries, you're sitting stuck in one area, so you trick plants into moving you. There's even data now to show that they produce a type of chemical that alters the brain behavior of the pollinators. Just think of it. There's a plant product that alters the behavior of an animal. I don't know why you're grinning, Ben, but there are many kinds of plants that alter people's behavior. And so who's domesticated who? Composed of hundreds of interconnected modules, all that will survive on their own. They have no brains. They have decision-making regions constantly exchanging information on what's happening above. Information and decisions on light, moisture, manufactured food products. React to light, temperature, water, nutrients, touch, soil, structure, microbes, gravity, insect attack, and chemical signals from other plants. And these signals are all sent out to other plants. And I like this one, for roses and blueberries, they should be able to live forever. No animal can do that. The oldest rose I found is 1,200 years old on an old church in Germany that had been bombed to the ground in the 2 world wars and still growing. That has to be amazing. But the most important thing about plants, and I wish I would have had a term like this. Gerard, I don't know if you ever did that in your plant physiology course, but to say they eat light. As an entomologist, I never heard a botanist say that, but that's pretty neat when you think about it, right? So Lowbush blueberry circulate fluids without a heart. They breathe, they have no lungs, they detect light, they detect sounds. They have no eyes, they have no ears. They digest food without a stomach. They smell, they don't have a nose. They can taste, feel, communicate, grow towards water. How do you do that? If you're sitting in a dry area and there's water over there, how do you send one of those rhizomes towards water? How do you know the gradient is going from nothing to water? Or phosphates or nitrates. How do they do that? And they have all kinds of decision-making abilities. How many flowers to produce, when to abort the flowers. On the hill, many times, you'd be sitting there all of a sudden, all the flowers fall off. All of them, the whole hill, whole campus. There's not enough moisture. They're throwing in the towel for that year. Or the berries will be half grown, and they'll communicate that. This led me back to this man that you would all know the work of. This is, of course, Charles Darwin. And unbeknown to me up until a year ago, in the last quarter of his life, he was solely a botanist. And the last book he wrote was The Movement of Plants. And he did this with his son, Francis, in their front room on their dining room table. And all the experiments that he did that described movement in plants were done there. This was published in 1880 and has been all but ignored until about the last 100 and 125 years. And in the book, when you read it, and I went back and looked at it, you saw plants as sensitive creatures. We all know that animals are referred to as creatures. Botanists haven't come up with any cuddly name like, or symbols like teddy bears, but what do you call plants? But he saw them as sensitive creatures whose growing tips or leaves or seedlings can track the movement of the sun. He showed they could respond to the least beam of light, pull of gravity, and the slightest touch of a browsing animal. How are we doing time-wise? We're doing good. Here's the final sentence in his book. And this changed the views of an awful lot of botanists around the world, and certainly including myself. And it's so important, I'm going to read it. It is hardly an exaggeration. One of the last things he ever wrote, and he died right after this. It's hardly an exaggeration to say that the tip of the radical, or another word for the root, thus endowed with sensitivity and having the power of directing the movement of adjoining parts, acts like the brain of one of the lower animals, the brain being seated with the anterior end of the body, receiving impressions from sense organs and directing several movements. Wow. Let's just look at that in a little more detail. This sentence, 2 messages. The root apex represents the anterior end. That means all our lives we've spent looking at plants upside down. That the top of the plant is the base of the roots. The bottom of plants is the green stuff up above. And all of the activities of the green stuff up above are being run by the roots. The second part, that the root apex may be considered a brain-like organ endowed with a sensitivity which controls its navigation through soil. Darwin showed a plant growing along root underground, a centimeter away from a rock will turn and move. How did it know the rock is there if you never touched it? some kind of message from the root sent to the rock, bouncing off. They never explained it, but boy, people around the world really are now. So it's this little root tip that is the control center of the whole plant. It actually controls the opening and closing of stomata on the leaves by events that they detect down here. So that root tip is acting like a brain. It's sensing and evaluating information, making decisions that impact the whole home plant, communicate with other roots. They never touch other roots. They communicate the roots of other plants. They react to insects feeding on their leaves. And if they can do all that, why do we say intelligence is only part of the biology of upper animals, like primates? There's a whole range of intelligence. And proof of that, I go to the grocery store the other day. They have to be intelligent. Here's some Mexican berries. It says that they care. Well, if they care, they must be intelligent, showing some behavior. Last Sunday night, in researching this for one of my other articles, I had read a lot by this fellow, Beluska. I immediately sent it to Gerard. It blew me away. After 400 publications on the role of roots and intelligence, maybe he's same age I am, I don't know, making his last contribution and summarizing what he did. But this one really changed my life. I sent it to Gerard last Sunday night. But again, sitting there, bang, hitting the button, and there it was. No wandering over to the library, no one in the library alone. Corton got to see it right away. And he has shown there's even electrical stimuli sent from cells here. And you don't think of electrical signals sent by a plant. Actually, as people started to look and argue with zoologists that these should be considered intelligent, has caused people to start looking at them seriously, and all kinds of books and articles on this topic. And of course, hormones that are coming out. But there's your brain center. And then there's a couple bullets, Gerard, if you saw, that blew me away. I never thought of things like this when I'm sitting on the hill. Look at this. The fact that plant roots actively control carbon in the soil, and they argue more carbon is stored underground than above ground, is what their data are showing. That blew my mind. The fact that plant roots actively control carbon in the soil further supports the view that plants may also be able to actively control climate. And I sent that to Dave Pearson. I see him writing like mad down that plants can control climate. Wow. And I never thought of that when I was sitting on the hill. And then there's about 6 of these bullets. Here's another one. Consider plants as active and intelligent agents has therefore profound consequences, not just for future climate scenarios, but also for understanding mankind's role and position within the Earth's biosphere. 2 minutes, oh boy. So the next time you visit a Lowbush blueberry patch, remember they know you're there. Source of food on campus. You all know what blueberries look like, and on your pancakes, highly nutritional food materials, all kinds of benefits. And even the Right Honorable Minister of the Environment, you'll like this, Dave, Environment and Change, Stephen Guilbeault, is very anxious to learn about Sudbury blueberries. In fact, he was in Sudbury 2 years ago and wanted to learn about Lowbush blueberries. So I said, Stephen, I'll come over to Science North and tell you about blueberries, but for the benefit of the students of Laurentian University, it would really look good if you wore a blue shirt. And if you expect these students to respect the work you're doing as a minister and to vote Liberal in the next election, you should wear a blue shirt. And he did. Collecting blueberries can be a family event, a social event. And when you are studying blueberries on campus, don't go up there by yourself. Go up with a group of people. Our 2 kids grew up on this hill collecting blueberries. Our 5 grandkids grew up on this hill collecting blueberries. Here is one, 15 months old. And I remember clearly saying to him, if you eat blueberries every year, you will grow up to be taller than I am. And you see that university over your right shoulder? The day will come where you'll be inviting me to convocation and you'll be a proud graduate of that university, only if you eat blueberries. And he did. Nature positive. Our campus has an important role to draw attention to the unique biology that's on this campus. And as the university has reinvented itself, there's a group of young people here who are playing a very prominent role in that process. And they need to have everyone's support. You heard Ben talk about Environmental Sustainability Committee, and we're one of the nature positive universities. And there are a whole variety of different foods that are on campus that can be grown here. But imagine if we can get
Here, maybe I can speak to it at the same time.
All right.
So,
Can I have my water?
Of course, yes. My God. So thank you very much, Dr. Shorthouse. I just wanted to speak to this a little bit more because this seminar we're also planning on using as an announcement. So obviously there are wild fruits and berries all over the campus. We can see here we have blueberries, currants, red apples at the orchard, and even raspberries. But these foods are all ones that we can find on campus. Even if you have trouble identifying them, one thing that we recommend if you're into nature is to maybe use the iNaturalist app. This is really handy for us and even other researchers on campus that might want to be identifying where certain plants are or where certain animals might be found. But essentially, we're announcing a new student garden. So we're looking maybe for people that are interested to have their own little garden close to the lake center, or have some sort of secure food that they can grow themselves. That way we can, improve food sovereignty in our campus. So we do have a little sign up survey for anybody that's listening online or in person. You can just scan that with your phone. I'll keep that up for a few minutes, but realistically, we have a few plots that we'd like to rent out. And if anybody's interested, feel free to share this with anyone. And we'll get back to you by email if you want to contact us. There should be a place where you can leave all your information on the survey. Other than that, if you want to follow up on some Environmental Sustainability Committee social media, we have some stuff here as well as our email in case you want to contact us. Finally, I just want to thank Dr. Shorthouse.
Before you do,
Yeah.
click the one more.
One more.
One more I can give that you can't.
Aha. All right.
And that is the opportunity of an old guy to come back to a campus where you put your whole life in. You should have an opportunity to have some take-home messages. So another minute. Things I would say, there's beauty working in the natural world right on our campus. Take time to explain what you're doing to others, conferences, families, friends, seminars, coursework. Take an interdisciplinary approach to your study subject. Remember that higher degree I got from University of Saskatchewan is called a doctorate of philosophy, not doctorate of biology or any other science, but to take an overall philosophical view of what you're looking for, what you're looking at. Take photographs of your study subjects. I laughed when Gerard and I spoke at the beginning of our session today, saying, I wish I had taken pictures of so-and-so. He was here before I was. Now, with these things, you can take gazillion pictures of the same thing. We had cameras with no digital capability, film, Kodacolor, Kodachrome 64, Kodachrome 24, black and white, that's it. Take it down to Robert Brown's, drive down a week later to pick it up. Half didn't turn out, but you paid for them all. Very expensive. Now it's so easy for you to record things. Do so. Take photographs then that you're going to use in public presentations. Become a storyteller. You saw the reaction, most of which was true, of my meeting Stephen, my friend Stephen. I did. But those kind of stories add a lot to a lecture. It was personal. The way you reacted to my little grandson. Personal stories add a lot to presentations. Become a critical thinker. Oh, this is the most important thing. Confront all the pseudoscience and the fake news that exists today. As graduates of this university, I would say it's your responsibility to counter all of the fake news over science that is, and science and politics is throughout our society. Argue everything that you hear with wanting to see facts, observation, and data. Go back and look at Carl Sagan's book, The Demon Haunted World, where he forecast all the things that would happen, the terrible things that would happen in a world where people listen to fake news. And he described what people should do is to get yourself a baloney kit. And that is fight baloney or fake news. And that, I would say, is one of the most important messages that I could leave with the young people here today. Now we can get back.
I encourage the nature positive students to invite Joe, and for exactly this reason. That was one of the best seminars I've seen for a very long time, and I think we all thank him for that. And it's exactly to the point that we needed is to see science as exciting in all of its aspects. I have a 1-minute exciting idea that just came through the mail yesterday that I want to leave with this group. Is yesterday, the federal government announced an enormous research project headed up here on the Green Space campus for $1.5 million to study the restoration potential of the damaged wetlands. And it will start this summer with students from 4 or 5 different universities coming here. I think a dozen of them are being housed at Thornlow for the entire summer. And then an international crowd from the UK and other places arriving to meet them in the May. So that the green space is turning, I know we all love the green space, and it's very, very valuable for that. Yesterday, it's not official at all. I haven't even got approval, but I love to proceed without approval. Jane Goodall is turning 90 on April 3rd. And a number of us have proposed that we do something for Jane. And we'd like to give her a bog or a fen in one of the spots on in the green space with a dedicated plaque to Dr. Jane Goodall Restoration and Carbon Offset Wetland. Peter Beckett this morning is in approval to it. And we'd like the Student Association and these guys to, before April 3rd, we'd like to get a plaque and send her a virtual picture of her swamp, her bog. And she's already knows about it and she's thrilled about it. But we'd like to also install a seating bench above it and some proper signage on the trail so people don't get lost out there all the time with where to go. So I'm going to set up a tax receipt donation site at the university called Nature Positive University Projects, and try to quickly fundraise some donations to assure that we have the plaque and benches and things. So this group will get my first email and you can send it out widely. It's tax season anyway. So that's the exciting news from yesterday, that Jane would love to have a dedicated spot in the green space, which you can't easily run a bulldozer through the Jane Goodall wetland in the future to build a road. It'll help preserve it forever. And Joe and his work, the kind of work we did today, shows the value of that type of site. So I had to sneak that announcement in today. And I'll let these guys wrap up.
All right, so I just want to thank Dr. Shorthouse for a wonderful lecture.